Welcome back to the Be Ruthless Show. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and joining me today, besides my pup here, Dallas, is Connie Inglis, who is an award-winning author, editor, speaker, and teacher. She's also the host of her own podcast, Born on a Bridge, a podcast which focuses on building bridges of understanding and making relational connections. Her mission in her podcast and future memoir is to connect the world that knows nothing about and often fears mental illness to the world of mental illness as she has lived in it as a caregiver to an adult child diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She wants the world to know that in the midst of the pain and heartache, there's hope. Connie and her husband have lived cross-culturally in Southeast Asia for the last 30 plus years, dedicating their lives to working with minority language groups in Bible translation, literacy, and teaching. Connie's greatest joy is found in her grandchildren. They fill her with love and laughter and lead her into the wonder of life, always. If she's not spending time with family, in her free time, you can find Connie painting or hiking, or if she's lucky, traveling to places she's never been, always with pen and paper in hand. Ever curious, she knows inspiration for her next poem, story, or novel could be right around the corner. I love that.
That sounds like very impressive.
We sometimes forget until we hear it, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. This is an important conversation.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell everyone a little bit about you that's not in a bio?
Okay. Well, I'm going to share a little bit about what I write about in my chapter, which is the ambiguity of grief. Because when you're a caregiver of someone with a mental illness, you're experiencing grief, not the death of a person, like a physical death, but there is still a loss. You've lost a relationship. You've lost who that person was. They've lost that. And when our son spirals into mania, then the grief just, oh, there it is again. And that happens often. So it's an ambiguous grief. I called it a perpetual grief because I didn't know what to call it at first, because I couldn't find any information on what I was dealing with, because it wasn't your normal grief. And so finally I watched a webinar last year about non-bereavement grief, and then was connected to a website called www.ambiguousgrief.com, and I'm like, yes, there it is. That's me. I'm in that little bubble of people that are experience grief in a non-typical way. So that's kind of what my chapter is about, that kind of grief.
Yeah. And there are so many different kinds. And if we talk about them, if we address them, even if they're ambiguous as they happen, it gives us tools and skills to handle the other things that do continue to come at us through life. But I address moving as grief, right? Graduating and having, going from high school to college is wonderful, but it's also the loss of everything. So there are so many people who need to hear and understand this, that just because it's not talked about doesn't mean it doesn't need to be.
Right. Yeah. Transitions, I think transitions should be talked about more, about the loss when you're in a transition, and the grief that a person experiences when they're, changing. I have a friend who last year they retired and moved from their house to another place, and her husband was doing great with it all, but she was struggling. And it's like, you're grieving. I get it. It's a loss. Let's grieve. Let's together grieve and share our grief. Let other people know. And people don't call that grief, but it should be called grief. Ambiguous grief. It's a grief. So people.
And then how the people, what are you going through in life in addition to? because we were talking before we started recording about the broken brain and how people grieve and heal differently. And so for me, someone who's had anxiety my whole life, moving was my anxiety really went through the roof when I moved to Denver, yet I moved here to marry the love of my life. So people didn't understand that, I'm absolutely happy. However, I am lost. I don't know where anything is, and I don't
Right.
have any of my normal support around me. And I
Mhm.
really adjusted in a way that was my own and harder. And these are all invisible.
Yeah. So could you talk to someone about it? Like, did you understand yourself at the time?
I did, no one else did.
Yeah.
You just moved
Yeah.
to marry Jim. This is the happiest time of your life. It's
Yeah.
easy to meet people. Go here, join this. There's meetup. People did not understand
No.
whatsoever.
No. No. Yeah. So like just recently, um, so our son's girlfriend in the past um died. So there's a death to grieve. So a normal person is grieving, and that's hard enough. But when you have a mental illness, a broken brain, grief just is insurmountable, overwhelming. Like, okay, so yeah, how do you explain that? How do you share that without people going, yeah, right, okay, I don't. There's a lack of empathy or compassion often when we want to talk about our grief, especially when it's, an ambiguous grief. Like people don't understand. Okay, yes, I'm grieving. Let me grieve.
And we need people to let us grieve and not minimize it and push it away. I'm outspoken. So I was able to say something, but
Right.
not everyone responds that way. And if you can't let people know, look, I'm not okay, even though I look okay and I'm getting married and it's the happiest time in my life. If people don't put that out there, then their inner struggle is more intense and no one knows. People don't understand that just speaking up and saying I'm going through something can be really, really difficult. And so teachers, employers, there's no timeline. It doesn't matter if it was 6 days ago or 6 years ago. If you have people on your team with mental illness or dealing with grief or going through a major transition, they will have things that impact them.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, on the outside, I can, put up a really good front. And that's kind of what I've done all my life because of, my childhood. It was like that was my choice. I just like, okay, I'm just going to put that in a room in my brain and lock the door and okay, fine. But then it comes out in, physical illness and sickness or, or pain, physical pain, because you're not processing and you don't have anyone to share that with. And yeah, you can't just leave it back there in a room back there because it's gonna come out in yeah, bad ways if you don't process and deal with it and let it out and have people around you that will listen. So
How do you and your husband deal with it together as a family?
um it's well, we process differently. I'll say that. I tend to just lock it up for a while and this like I'm gonna okay, let's do the things that we need to do. Whereas like my husband, he's way more sensitive and I love him for that. That's what attracted me to him. But it's harder for him to in the spur, in the moment to be able to know how to make decisions. But so he processes much differently than I do. And it took me a while to figure that out. And our daughters also. So it's a family. It yeah, it's a moving together as a family is not an easy thing, but we talk about it. We go on hikes, we do stuff together that just helps us process together. Physical activity is always good, I think, in healing. And I'm a writer, so I write. That's what helps me process stuff. So,
But
yeah.
you said you talk about it and you
Yes.
acknowledge that everyone deals with it in their own way. And
Yep.
that's the biggest thing. We only know what we experience. And I am more like your husband, right? So I can handle every crisis for everyone else and be like you, but when it's my own, right? I need to lean on those who can do what you do and get it done, and I need to step back and
Right.
not let myself get too overwhelmed.
Yep.
That's been family conversation. What do we
Yep.
do to help? What do we do that makes it worse? If we don't talk about that, then that person is struggling in a way that nobody else sees or understands.
Yeah. And I also have sisters who are just right there. I mean, I can text them anytime, and they have been my biggest support group. Yeah, and they get it. They're not immune either in their families, and so we do it together. We suffer together, and we, like I wrote in my chapter, let's celebrate the suffering because it is a human connection. Not like woohoo, but like, okay, I get it. I'm with you. We pray for each other. That's part of our, the faith aspect of how people deal with grief, and being a caregiver of someone with mental illness. It also is important to me. So
What do you do for you and your own mental health as you are caretaking? How do you make sure you're still balanced and on task?
well, I write, like I say, I process a lot with my writing, especially poems. I'll just like, yeah, I can all the yucky stuff, I can write in a poem and get it out. But I also paint. There you can see all the different paintings back there. Not all of those are mine, because my daughters and my son also, but they all paint. And painting is so therapeutic for me. And working in my garden is so therapeutic for me. So yeah, there's different things that I do that just really calm my brain, and we all need some outlet to help ourselves process. So you go for walks with your dogs, right?
Anything outdoors, but you also let people in, right? There are millions of people going through this that are feeling ashamed or too embarrassed to have this conversation. So the
Right,
fact that you're not just willing to talk about it casually, you're putting it all out there. I hope it helps everyone, but at least one person understand that the suffering is more intense by yourself. And
right.
so to everyone who is silently going through this, how did you know that you weren't going to be that way? And what would you say to the people who, because I say the world has it backwards. We have nothing to be ashamed of. The world does, but that's not helpful. That's really not helpful when you're dealing with it and need support.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, I decided that the vulnerability was like, my publisher would say, vulnerability is your superpower. But that's not easy, because you're putting yourself out there, and other people, you don't know what other people are going to say or do. It, you have to have a tough skin if you're going to be vulnerable. And that, I I don't, I don't know how to help someone become vulnerable. Um, yeah, maybe you have some helpful hints, but like in
Absolutely.
my,
But I think you found communities.
yes, yes,
So
yeah,
where did you look? There are certainly people who will not respond well in this world, unfortunately.
yeah.
So we need to find the places that are more likely to be a positive environment. Are there Facebook communities? Are there groups that people can turn to?
Yeah, I said my sisters, but also I have a writing group that I share my journey with. I'm part of a this is like because I'm Canadian, so the programs are very different here than in the States. I have a Facebook group called Families Supporting. Oh man, it's FAMI, FAMI, Alberta. And I go there and share, this is what's happening. Can anyone help me or offer me some support or know what I should be doing? I've also joined went to some grief counseling, which, I would recommend you go to a counselor and like who you are, a grief therapist counselor, and find someone that you can share your story with. If you can share your story with one person, that will help you to be able to share your story with another person and another person, and yeah, offer hope. So I guess my podcast is out there, and yeah, it's it's me being very vulnerable, and it's bottom line, it's not my story. So my son has allowed me to share my side of the story, um, because really, it's his the mental illness is his story. So, but he says, "Yeah, mom, and you can share that, but that's not."
It's his story, but it impacts those we live with and those who love us,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I wasn't allowed forever. My mom's a recovering alcoholic. Well, I wasn't allowed to discuss that. That was her secret, but that affected my life. And
Oh,
until
yeah.
I decided I can't do this anymore, I am
Yeah.
letting it out. That
Yeah.
it was her burden I was carrying. So there still is the aspect that even if you're living with somebody who has the flu, it affects you.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we do need I of course his permission is necessary, but you do still have your own story.
Yeah. And I have found that the more people I tell, the more I hear, "Oh, so and this is what's happening in our family's situation," and, they'll come and talk to me when I'm sharing, like, "This is what I'm dealing with too." And it just makes them feel like they're not alone. So the more we share our story, yes, some people won't get it, but you will always find those that are like, "Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story because it helps me know that I'm not alone and that there's hope." So that's why I share my story. And yes, I still grieve. So I need to let other people know I'm grieving. On the outside, I may not look like it, but I'm grieving. Um, Please be kind to me. Right?
Yes.
Please be kind to me. I'm grieving. My I'm not as sharp as I normally am because I'm grieving. Um, and yeah, so
So I
yeah,
agree with what you said. More often than not, we are met with compassion or someone saying, "Me
mhm,
too," or "I know someone with." And so
mhm,
those negatives, the responses we're afraid of or we've experienced outweigh and can stop people from getting so much support and community. I love my friends and family, but I needed
mhm,
widows. I needed people who understood my
right.
unique language and
Mhm,
finding those people. So again, it doesn't have to be a podcast. It can be connecting with Connie and saying, I'm not in Canada, but maybe you can help me find a group like FAMI near me.
yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm willing to chat with anyone who's like, "Ah, that's me," and no one gets it. Like, my family doesn't get it. I don't have anyone to connect with. But, like, on my podcast, there's a place where you can respond at the bottom, and I look at that if anyone or my website, you can contact me that way, and yeah. I'm happy to
Are
say
there
go ahead.
the waves keep coming. You just talked about the
Yeah.
loss of his girlfriend,
Hmm.
which then impacts everyone, not just him.
Right.
So what outside of your self-care techniques, what does the family do? What we cannot protect anyone from the waves of life. They're
Right.
going to keep coming. So how do you have a sense of this is what I like your first aid kit?
Oh, my first aid kit. Well, okay, so I'm because my faith is very important to me. My first aid kit is to run to God and say, "Ah, help me. Help our family. This is what's going on." I mean, God knows, but still he wants us to share our burdens with him. Like lamenting. Yeah. Um and that helps to lament and get it out there and say, "Oh, ah," because when our lives are not good and we just want to yell and scream and, I don't know, kick at the door or bang something, um our God is big enough to get that and understand that, and he's, not afraid to deal with our human emotions. um but as a family, um I guess we mostly just talk and try to help each other process in a healing way. um yeah. I
That's
Ye
not that's not a little thing, and it's also not as common,
Yeah.
right? I mean, families, even I was talking to a husband and wife yesterday, divorced, how different they grew up and how different they communicate with their kids. And
Mm,
that impacts the kids, right? We have kids
yes.
who are seeing open communication and then not so open. And so that's a big thing. Just saying, let's deal with this. That's all I wanted was people who would let me talk and not expect me to care about things like the weather and the traffic and the rude person at the checkout line. Really?
Yeah, that is so true. Like, okay, it's nice to have people like family, it, not just my immediate, but also, like I say, um, well, my husband's family also, just very close. And the longer I live, the more I realize close families are unique these days. Um, but I can, yeah, say this is what's going on right now, and yeah, um, they just let me be. So I'm happy to have that community where I can be honest and open and just let it out. So yeah, we all need that.
We all need that. And not everybody understands it the same way. Right.
Right.
My brother is not the feelings guy, right? But if I'm really not okay, he's my brother and he's there. He knows the
Mhm.
difference between regular 9 to 5 stress and when we're not okay. And the people who care will learn.
Right.
My family did not understand anxiety, even when Faces of Mental Illness came out
Yeah.
and I wrote my chapter. They were not debating, but quite, that's not what it was really like, was it? Because we look a certain way. And for those of us who are high achievers and can put anxiety on a shelf, I couldn't put grief on a shelf, but anxiety I
Mm.
could.
Yeah.
It was like they were reading about a different person. They had absolutely no idea. So sharing our story also is data, like you said today. Be gentle.
Yeah. And like I've read a number of memoirs on, ambiguous grief and on mental illness, and specifically bipolar disorder, and books on it. And the more knowledge, um, the more knowledge I gained, the more I understood, like what my son is going through, what I'm going through. um, reading other people's stories helps me say, "Oh, yeah, I am normal. I'm normal, whatever. I'm not alone," I guess, you know? Um, and so, I think for someone that's struggling with like ambiguous grief, there are books that you can read about whatever kind of grief you're dealing with. Um, I read a book about uh, that a woman wrote after a divorce, and ambiguous grief for her, but it was, not your typical grief. And uh, all she had to process and go through as this new person, all of a sudden, the loss of the relationships she had that were no longer. So we all, again, it's grief. Can we just talk about grief? you know, like, let's call it grief. Let's call it what it is. It's grief. And
That
then,
word is like the scarlet letter. People do not like that word.
no, they don't. Um, but that's what it is. Can we just call it grief and then together process and move forward with it? So, yeah.
It's important when we when we can attach a name to something and understand what we're experiencing and connect with others. There will still always be those that don't, but I know that there's someone I can go to any hour of the day
Mm.
because I have let the wall down and said, I want others who get it in. Now, there are people who are not allowed in that world.
Yeah, right. Yep. Yeah, because then they're more hurtful than helpful. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I know that you've just dealt with that recently. So, yeah, it
So
happens.
many people say I'm not a writer, yet you don't have to be to get your thoughts out on paper. Did you know when you were like, I have diaries, notebooks of poems my whole life. My mom always said, you'll write, you'll write. It was for me just getting my feelings out. I
Yeah.
didn't know it would turn into this. Did you sit down knowing I'm writing a book?
No. I mean, this is year 10, almost year 10 of us living and helping our son. Um, but when you're in the middle of it, and we still are, but when you're at the beginning, it's like, what's going on? The understanding, it was like I was in shock, and then acceptance, and then, the different stages of grief. And now I'm looking back and think, oh, there's many things I've learned that I want other people to know, and I want to share my story so to help someone. I want to help others because initially I felt so alone and I didn't know where to turn. And I didn't understand the grief, like I said. So I want other people to know, like, yeah, you're not alone in this. Yeah. Um, so yeah, never initially I didn't think I would be writing a memoir. I've written a fiction book. I have that published. So a memoir is just so like in contrast, right? But I just felt like, okay, I want to tell my story so that others hopefully can be helped. Yeah. And find hope in the midst of it. Yeah.
And that's common when we're going through a struggle to find some new creative outlet to release it. People write music with
Hmm.
get their feelings out. So anyone who's thinking this doesn't relate for me, I'm not planning to write in a book, writing is a way to get it out.
Yeah.
You know, so journal, no, people think it doesn't have to be Dear Diary. It can be bullet points. It can be whatever you want, but
Yep.
it was a way for you to sort through and get things out of here.
Yep. Yeah. Like you're journaling, right? It's like, I need to, yeah, process. You got to find some way to process. Yeah. and writing for me is the way I did it.
What made you say yes to this book? Because it is more typical grief. Your story is unique and necessary, and I'm so grateful you said yes. But it does sort of stand on its own.
Yes, it does. And well, I was watching a webinar where you were being interviewed, and you said, I'm putting this book together on grief, and if there's anyone out there that would like to share their story on grief, it doesn't have to be a typical kind of grief. I thought, that's me. I want people to know that my grief and other people's grief is not your typical certain physical death and loss. There's this ambiguous grief that no one really understands when it's a loss, but not a death, but still a loss. It's a grief nonetheless. So then I reached out to you and said, hey, would this kind of grief fit in your book? And you said yes. And we moved on from there, didn't we?
It is, and it's necessary for people to know that you have rights. It's real. We can give you more information about it. Parents, teachers, you are dealing with students who have dealt with ambiguous grief and don't know how to say how they're feeling as a child. So even just addressing and acknowledging when people have major transitions and figuring out how we can be there to support them through. If you're already dealing with something like me, already have anxiety, these things are harder to navigate than they are for somebody else. So we can work together and create resources and plans that are so much harder on your own.
And I love the community with you and the other authors, other writers in this book. It's because there's so many different everybody has their own story, and so many stories are going to connect with so many people, and I think it's just really important to put this book out there and let people know there are many faces of grief. So yeah, I just wanted to be a part of this whole thing, and let people
And you'll
know.
hopefully be coming to Colorado for.
I hope so. When I'm a little far away, and yeah, but I would still love to at the end of August. Yeah, you can tell people about that if you want to.
Yeah,
So
we're having so many Meet the Authors events before the book is actually available in December. So Grief Hub is traveling all over and having something in Colorado on National Grief Awareness Day and International Overdose Awareness Day. So that's August 30th and 31st. But there is something somewhere every month leading up to, and we will have some of the authors, as many as possible, in person, and those who are not there will be streamed in, so they can still be a part of sharing the book and giving sneak peeks. And the community we've created is pretty beautiful, and it's become so much more than I ever, it is just not the typical book. I see these relationships staying beyond, and we support each other. Life is happening as we're writing, and there have been, some of our authors are going through big things right now, and it is another place to turn.
Yes, this is definitely with you and the community you have and the different well, you have your website and your podcast and different opportunities for people to get help if they need it. So, and people need to know there is a Grief Awareness Day, and then there's that whole week also in December. So yeah, it needs to be made more out there for people to know. Yes.
We had Molly and Leslie on last week, the sisters who shared their story, and it was Juneteenth and banks were closed. And I'm not disagreeing with that. But can we just be on a calendar?
Yeah.
Can we be acknowledged? And it's not for us. You know that you are the family of someone living with bipolar. I know I'm a widow. It's for other people to be reminded so that they can do more and be supportive and think about it because we look fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, we do. Oh, everything's good for them. They're smiling. Yeah, okay.
What could people do to be more supportive? Because I mean, for me, I just say talk about Jim. But I think people are afraid of these subjects and walk around on tiptoes and maybe don't bring it up. Do people ask you about your son? Is it a taboo subject?
I think for some, but the more I share my story, the more community comes around me and asks us, "How are you guys doing? What's going on? How can we pray for you?" That kind of stuff. But again, I have to open my mouth, right, and let them know. No, it's someone asks you, "How are you doing?" Well, if you're not doing well, often we'll just say, "Oh, it's all good," but it's not. So I'm more aware of that and more willing to say, "Well, it hasn't been that great of a week," and if they want to know more, they'll ask. And if they don't, then that's the end of that conversation. And you know what? That's okay. Not everyone can be there or be in the right space to even listen. Everyone's dealing with stuff, so you can't expect everyone to say, "Oh, tell me about it," and that kind of
But
thing.
but it's an honest answer. It's not
Yep.
putting in the energy to pretend you're fine. You do not have to use that. If we are just,
Exactly.
you know, not having the best day,
Yep. Yep.
that
Yeah,
that
honesty.
for me takes away. I am not going to spend time pretending so that you feel better.
Yes, I've learned that about you. And that's good. You are a good example for us all. Yeah, that, I'm not okay. And, we're not meeting together online because I'm not okay. So, all right, that's fine. I totally get it. I'm not okay either today.
Some of the grief hub events are because of that. I was just
Hmm.
naturally leaning on friends to
Hmm.
get through some stuff, and
Yeah.
other people have ideas. So when we let people in, it's not, you just never know what it is. It could be, I just need to vent. But
Hmm.
people do want to help and be there
Yep.
for us. And those who care have ideas we won't see. So,
That's exactly right. Yeah, and they can say, "Here's a resource. Have you checked this out?" And I'm like, "No." And then I go there and I think, "Oh, this is so helpful." So, this is what happens when you're honest with other people. Yeah, you just never know. So,
what else should people know about you? What am I forgetting?
oh, I don't know. I
Well,
I'm here. Sorry?
website is
Yeah, www.conniemayingles.ca. I'm there and I share, I have a blog. I share my story and um, I'm available if people want to, uh, hear, invite me to share my story. That's fine. Any opportunity I have. Um, if people want to hear my story, if they think it's going to help them, because I'm available. That's me. So yeah. Hmm.
on social media. Is it the same names? Because
Yep.
there are people who might just want to say hi.
Yeah. I am on Facebook and on Instagram, and you can find me Connie Mae Ingles, uh, MAE Ingles, INGLIS. Oh, my name's right on right on the screen. There you go.
Yep. And we'll put it in the notes. We'll put a link for your podcast. How often, when are episodes? When can people listen?
Well, I actually paused my podcast for the summer and I'll start it up again in the fall. I think there's 13. It's on Spotify. Yeah, yeah. So that's part of my journey. I'm, you know, it has helped me process actually my own podcast, but that's been good for me, helpful for me. Yeah, to talk about it.
Final thoughts for everyone before we go.
Just you might think that you're alone, anyone out there that's watching this, but you're not. You just need to let someone in and say, "Hey, um, I'm struggling. I'm grieving. Let's share our grief with each other so that we can help each other and move forward and become better." There's healing and sharing with each other in our grief, whatever kind of grief it is. Yeah.
And if you want to do that with Connie May Ingalls, Burning the Bridges is the podcast.
Born on a bridge, because I was
Born on a
actually
Bridge.
born on a bridge.
Yes.
So then it's the bridge thing. I want to make people more aware of the whole mental illness world. So I'm connecting people to what it's like to be a caregiver, and yeah.
Connect with Connie in any of those places. I'll put them all in the show notes. Thank you for being here. And until next time,
Thanks,
always
Sam.
be ruthless.
Okay.
Oh, my little close button is gone.